Alrighty, thank you very much everybody for attending today. We appreciate your time. We're going to get going now. All right, so today we're going to be going over what's new with the 2020 AEC collection. Everyone's going to be on mute for the duration of the session. Any questions that anybody has, please put into the Q&A or the chat window. I'll keep an eye on that as we go through it. If I can answer the questions in the process of giving the presentation, I will. If it's something that I feel needs to kind of get held off to the end, I'll take care of it at the end. But today's presentation is being done by Microdesk. We are an AECO consulting firm. We've been in business since 1994. We have 12 locations in the US and one over in the UK. And our team is over 190 strong on just the technical side of things. So all of us come from the actual trades. I worked in architecture for about 10 years before moving into consulting. We have people that are in the engineering side, construction side, mechanical, structural, and we also have our own internal team of developers to create content and tools. Yep. So some of the things that we actually help our clients with is BIM. That includes training, it includes custom content creation, it includes model building. It also includes working on the project alongside of our clients to make sure that they have the necessary skills in their team and help them be successful. As part of that, we also work on long-term strategy or workflows and assessments. We can do mentoring and support for technology and processing. And again, we have our own internal dev team. So today's presentation is going to be given by myself, Peter Marchese. I am the Senior Technology Evangelist at Microdesk, which basically means I get to play around and work out all the new and upcoming technologies and make sure it's actually useful. So if it's something really neat and new, that's great, but does it actually do something that's beneficial to a client, to the actual workflow, to the teams? So right now, a lot of that is on VR, UAVs, cloud services, but I'm also one of the experts on Revit and Navisworks and construction coordination. Alrighty, so for today's agenda, we're going to be taking a look at the what's new for the AEC collection. We'll talk about the updates for 2020, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. Now, excuse me. Now, before we get rolling, though, I did want to ask everybody just a couple of basic questions just to get an idea of how everybody's using things out there. So here's a first quick poll. So just looking to see how many people are designers or engineers or otherwise. Awesome, thank you very much. So got a couple people in construction, good to see, some PMs. Alrighty. Next one, is anybody actually using 2020 yet? Oh, cool, so we have a couple of people that are actually taking the plunge already, started working off of the new services and new tools. So hopefully I'll be able to show you some new things on maybe some of the tools you haven't tried yet, or even in some of the ones that you are. Okay, and then last one, and then we'll get rolling. Is anybody here using the cloud or mobile technology? So cloud could be BIM 360, Dropbox, Procore, any of the different cloud services for collaboration and coordination. Great, thank you very much everybody for hopping in on the polls for us. We always appreciate that. Alrighty, so let's get rolling. So now, in terms of what's new in Autodesk for the AEC collections for 2020, a lot of this is going to be focusing on the specific AEC collection. So Autodesk has 3 main collections of tools for their different services. So the one that we're going to be focusing on is the AEC one. Now, a lot of the tools that they have are mixed throughout them. So you're going to find like AutoCAD throughout all of them, 3D Max. But again, the one that we're going to focus on today is that AEC one. And in terms of that, there's a lot of things going on inside of there and a lot of updates. So what I'm going to be focusing on for today's presentation are these tools. And again, I'm trying to squeeze everything into a manageable amount of time for everybody. So I'm not going to touch on every single thing that's been changed in all of these tools. What I'm going to be doing is sort of like the cliff notes or highlights of all of them. And do keep in mind that we do have a specific session on Revit for 2020 coming up in July. And I'll mention a little bit more of that later on. And so let's get rolling. So on the 3D Max 2020, there's a handful of tools and changes that are going to be beneficial to the different teams. So what we're going to find that is consistent across a lot of the tools this year is a lot of performance updates. So in this case, faster playback speeds. If you're actually running through and animating or looking at things, you can see from 2019 to 2020, the frames per second has actually been doubled. So it's much smoother, it's much faster in terms of being able to keep up with the work that you're doing. Also, if you're going to be doing previews for your rendering. So in this case, this one is literally half the amount of time. So now, outside of just the performance ones, there's also some coordination tools. So a lot of people that are using the AEC collection are using 3D Max, and as part of that workflow, they might be connecting to Revit or other tools. If you're importing Revit content into 3D Max, there's two great updates now. Number one is if your Revit file is 2017 to 2019, you can import that into Max 2020 without having to upgrade the Revit file. So that's one benefit. The other one is the ability to import this. You have a few more combination or import settings. So I can combine materials by the Revit family type and then the material now. So it gives me more flexibility in terms of how I bring that model in there. And other things, they updated some new chamfer modifiers that gave some different improvements and flexibility. So a lot of different components on that. And one of the things that we tend to hear a lot from people when we ask them, have you used 2020 yet? Or whatever the latest release happens to be. A lot of people might say that I'm waiting for the point release or the first service pack. Well, the first service pack is actually already out for 3D Max. And one of the benefits that it brings with it is the ability to essentially detach or have a floating viewpoint. That I want to have a float viewpoint. I can choose which of the views I want to sort of mimic and make separate. And then I can start dragging that away. If I'm working in a multi-monitor situation, I can take one of my views and drag it off to the separate monitor and treat that as a separate element. I can make it look how I want, orbit around, and work normally. So those detachable viewports are definitely very beneficial. Some of the other performance updates that we have is a lot of customization when it comes to the UV flattening. We also have a lot of things for the visualizations. So there's more plugins that are available. The IES lights and rendering is improved. Civil view textures have been better represented for Arnold. So a lot of different things for the rendering and for the performance. Oh, and you also are able to update your keyboard shortcuts, and you can double click on selections now to bring up more information. So a lot of little things for 3D Max that are going to help streamline the workflows and to make hopefully your processes more enjoyable and easy to get through. Now, on AutoCAD 2020, one of the things I wanted to mention is, because I've found that a lot of people don't realize this, if you are using AutoCAD and you have the AEC collection, you have access to the AutoCAD including specialized tool sets. So essentially what that means is that you have AutoCAD, but you also have the different tool sets from raster design, Plant 3D, AutoCAD architecture, AutoCAD MEP. All these are essentially integrated into that. Now, in addition to the typical desktop connections that you have for the AutoCAD program, you also have access to a couple of different platforms or locations for this. So what I mean by that is you tend to know that you've got AutoCAD on the desktop, but there's also the web app and the mobile app. Both of those have been updated. So you actually have a more simplified interface. And if you'll notice, this is actually running on a Mac. So when you're using the web app, it doesn't really care what platform you're on. Are you running on iOS? Are you running on Windows? It's just a browser. So I can go through there and start working on a model there. I can then swap over to working on the mobile app on an Android or iOS device. And I can synchronize that back and forth. And one of the features they have inside of AutoCAD is that ability to save to, and I can basically save that to the web. And then I can open it up from the web and back and forth. So it makes it a little bit easier to coordinate with the my other teams or just to work remotely when I need to. And over the last year or two, Autodesk has been focusing on making strategic partnerships. And one of those allows you to view and edit your DWGs from the cloud. So if you're inside a Dropbox or even OneDrive, you can right-click on that and essentially say that you want to view or edit that. And it'll understand that, okay, I'm going to open this up in the browser for AutoCAD Web. Now, outside of that side of the AutoCAD updates, one of the things that, again, Autodesk is being consistent with certain changes. They've updated the interface. So you have this new dark theme. So that's meant to be less strain on the eyes, easier to work with, and better recognition of what the different tools are. They've updated the performance, so when you're opening and closing your files, that should be about 50% faster than it has been if you're running on solid state. There's a new blocks palette, so this allows you to insert blocks much more easily and actually much faster than previous. There we go. And you can actually save steps by using the repeat placement option. So you can basically just repeat the last. There's a new tool called Quick Measure. Essentially what this allows you to do is you can move your mouse around a space, and it does more than just tell you measurements. Essentially what it's going to do is it's going to show you the measurements between any of the objects that are parallel. So if I move between a room, it should show me the dimension between two lines. If I don't see a dimension there, that just told me that those elements are not actually parallel, so I can use it as a QC tool. It'll also show a little orange sort of box in corners to let me know if those are actually perpendicular to each other. So if I don't really care what the distances are, but I just want to make sure that all my lines, none of them are on some weird angle, I can use this for that. And the DWG compare feature, that has actually been updated for the 2020 release. Now I can do this without leaving my current window, and if there's things in one file that I want to bring into the other, I can actually do that right then and there. Okay. And the purge feature, that's also been redesigned this year. So it's going to give you more options, more feedback, and a little bit better information on how you're actually working on things. And if there's something where it's like, okay, well, why can't I purge this? Or where is this? I can actually find that. And if I'm having trouble and I only want to purge elements that maybe are 0 length, that's one of the options inside of the settings. Cool. And again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop that into the questions window. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that throughout. Alrighty. Now, moving from AutoCAD 2020, we're moving into Civil 3D 2020. Now, Civil 3D has a couple of things that have been added to it this year. One of the big ones is going to be the addition of Dynamo workflows. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with what Dynamo is a visual scripting environment. This has been around for a while. Mostly Revit users have been using it. You can add different packages to it, which can expand the functionality. So it hasn't worked with just Revit, but that's been the main use case for most people. Now, within this is going to give people the ability to script or streamline different tools or different workflows. From a modeling standpoint, one example could be if you actually have sort of a train track layout here. And what I would like to do is place specific objects across the alignment. So I've got this element here already. What I can do is actually go through, work on my Dynamo sketch, put in the information, the connections, basically pull certain data out, tell it how to react to that data, and that can run through and lay all of the different ties along the tracks. From there, if what I want to do is take this a little bit further, I can then start looking at the actual topography and the other elements and say I want to actually extrude a profile along this. And not only do I want to do that, but I also want to place specific objects along that. So what I have here are the objects that I want to place, the specific kind of the object, and the location and offset that I want to actually place them. And I can use Dynamo to streamline that process so it automates the placement, the extrusions, the streamlining, and actually the connections of, in this case, the wires from component to component. So one idea could say, well, think about how long it would take you to do this manually, and then realize that you can run that in about 5 minutes. So it's meant to streamline that kind of process. And this is visual scripting from a modeling standpoint. You can also use it for other things like a QA, QC, or just checking your text, making sure that everything is caps, for example. Now, in addition to that, there were updates for the SSA module. So one of the things that they've added is the ability to have tailwater conditions. So in this case, I can now set those separately per storm while running different events. So I can modify the water elevation, set the peak rate factor, so that way I can have the multiple subbasins. And if I need to put in additional storage chambers, I can set that up and actually utilize that for my reporting and for the storage curves. So a couple of updates for the storm and sanitary analysis tool service. There's also some updates on the gravity networks component. So one of the things that they've added was the ability to have hydraulic properties to structural elements. And the nice thing about this is it allows you to interact directly in the module. So I'm not doing one thing and then going back and forth. I can actually work on this while I'm looking at my sections and I'm working on the model. So it's a modeless dialog box. So this allows me to visually inspect things. I can see where I have any issues or any warnings. I can deal with that while I'm going through the design. And I can easily export all my information out to a report that helps me understand all my decisions and how things are working. And then, just like with the AutoCAD side of things, Autodesk is standardized on that background color, so you're going to get more of this dark blue. They also updated certain enhancements when it comes from rail alignment and interoperability with InfraWorks, so they've been working with that IMX format, and other performance behind the dashboard for increasing the workflow and increasing the speed of use. Cool. Now, moving on to actual InfraWorks. So there's a couple of things that have been tweaked in this. One of the nice ones is continuing to work with ArcGIS. So last year, Autodesk started to connect InfraWorks to ArcGIS, and one of the things that they've done now is the ability to not just consume the information from it, but be able to change content here and push that content back into ArcGIS. So in this case, I could be working in InfraWorks. I could be seeing content that I pulled from there. In this case, I'm looking at a manhole and some sewage lines. I could make those changes, and then I can choose which data source this came from. So in this case, I would choose the ArcGIS data source, and then I can actually push that back. And then all I have to do is go back to the browser, hit refresh, and that'll actually change that. Now, another update they've done is changes to the schema tools. So if you're managing or manipulating a large amount of data or metadata for your project models, what this is allowing me to do is essentially create custom properties or attributes for the elements. So I can have specific elements like this. In this case, it's selecting a building, and you can add different features like owners. You can say what kind of data that is. Is it text? Is it number? I can go through there and define those properties, and then I can assign that to a specific element. So I can say this piece here, I need these properties inside of that. This element here, I need to have other properties for that. So this allows me to help manage the data that I'm looking at and be able to do more things with that. Because again, one of the things I can do in InfraWorks is very easily color code or set it up to have visual styles based on the data inside there. Or if I'm using this more for actual asset or BIM management, now I have the data that is stored. I can connect it to things and track that. And keeping with that connectivity for data, one of the things we can do now with bridges is we can actually send the design information for, say, a bridge to a spreadsheet. So in this case, I'm looking at a bridge. I can see the structural element there. I can send that to a spreadsheet, and I'm going to have multiple tabs inside that Excel spreadsheet that I can work through. And it understands what it's looking at because of the GUID. Now, from here, let's say what I wanted to do was change the number of columns. So you can see right now it's 2, now it says 3. If I then select back and say, okay, I want to send a spreadsheet, but what I want to do is update the existing, that would take the data from that Excel spreadsheet and then update the geometry to match that. So if there's certain things where you want to export out, review it, maybe run analysis, and then tweak it there, you can then take that and push it back into the model to make it updated. And then lastly, one of the other edits that they've done, or other additions that they've done, is more of a graphic setup. But what I can do now is I can graphically determine or differentiate between my cut and fill calcs for InfraWorks. So if I'm looking at this from a design standpoint and I just want it to be very clear what is changing, or I'm looking at this as more of a design thing and I want to show a little bit more realistic. Anything that's being cut would be dirt. Anything that's being filled, we're going to actually put on a different material. But this allows me to very easily showcase which one is which inside my view. Now one of the big ones. Again, we actually have a Revit webinar going on in July that's going to focus on 2020. So not so much to not steal the thunder, but also just to fit everything else within the time. I'm going to focus on some of the major ones. And the one next month will cover all of them. Now, one of the biggest additions is the ability to bring PDFs directly into Revit. For a long time, people have needed to do the workarounds, bring it into something like AutoCAD, use it as a screenshot, or use special plugins. Now, out of the box, I can insert PDFs directly into Revit. Now, the nice thing is I have controls over this. I can manage the size. If it's a multi-page PDF, I can choose which page or pages I want to look at. And if that PDF is not just raster, but it contains vector-based information, I can actually still snap to those vector edges. So if I wanted to snap and trace over content, it makes it very easy for me to do that. So everybody still uses PDFs for a large amount of things. If there's cases where I need to bring them into Revit, now I can do so very easily. Okay. One of the other big ones is the path of travel. Now, this does a couple of great things, one of which is if I'm trying to run analysis, whether it's for egress or just how far away certain things are, this allows me to automate paths between multiple points. It also creates a physical element. So if I'm trying to do something that is visual, not just I need to see what the distance is, but I need to be able to put this on a sheet or document this, it's doing both. So I can actually select one or multiple elements. Do I want to worry about everything that's visible? Do I want to go through certain elements? And if something doesn't update, it'll actually let me know about that. So this is great from right to light. It's great for a egress. It's great just for moving through the space and seeing what's my distances between different areas. So security, nurses, education, there's a lot of different use cases for this one. Now, another benefit that we've got now is the improved OR in view filters. So now we can actually say it's only going to be ORs. We can see the different parameters that we can work with, and we can actually see those parameters after the fact so we can work with them. So this has been one of those things that people asked for a long time, and we're starting to get more benefits from the different ORs, so we're not locked down to just this end of that. So this will just make life a lot easier when we're working with our views. And one of the benefits of this is that if you are using other tools like Glue or BIM 360, being able to use this for a view filter makes it easier for me to set specific views up that can be published to the cloud. From there, another general tool that is available for everybody is the ability to work with our scope box and applying parameters to them. This way we can track them in the view list and be able to see which ones are in use in which views and make sure that all the different views are using the correct one. So now I can actually track my scope box usage and make sure that if I have multiple scope boxes for different needs, portions of the project, phases, just make sure that everything is consistent and on the same page. Then up next, we have the ability to draw elliptical walls now. Now, these are still just a regular wall. It's not like it's a custom kind of wall. All the wall types that you already can draw with, we can draw here. We can have the ability to see the center location line. I can switch wall types easily. I can change the type. I can still work with it just like I normally would. Now, nice thing is some of the changes that have been done under the dashboard that allow this should pay dividends in the next couple of releases too. So even if you don't do a lot of elliptical walls, this will help out as things progress. But these walls will behave essentially how arc walls behave. Moving from there into some imported geometry workflows, you can bring in parts from InfraWorks or any direct shape, including IFC. You can actually split those parts for construction. So if you are doing bridge workflows or you're bringing in IFC, this allows you to work with different kinds of geometry that you can then split or divide. So you have more flexibility with those tools now. And if you are doing things specifically for construction workflow, now I can start to break those up and have a better understanding of maybe sequencing if I need to. Now, moving into more of the structural benefits, one of the new aspects here is updated steel connections for Dynamo. So there's new nodes that allow you to model those connections, and there's a handful of out-of-the-box scripts that are available for all users for the Dynamo Player. For those who aren't aware, Dynamo Player is basically a simplified version of Dynamo. So if you need to use it, you don't necessarily have to understand how Dynamo works. You just need to choose which one of those you want to run. What they've also done is enhance the performance when we're talking about detailed steel models. So they're taking advantage of background processes. So that way things are going to be responding a lot faster. We don't have to do things in sequence like a lot of the other elements inside of Revit have to work. And the nice thing is if things are actually being changed, it'll highlight the elements in color. And tying into that, we have more propagation tools for steel connections. So as long as things are consistent and certain conditions are met, this allows me to propagate that connection across. So I don't have to sit there and do it one at a time in every location. So streamlining the process of creating our connections and placing our connections on the project. And again, I'm not touching all of the different updates. I'm just touching on a handful. This is just one of the different updates for rebar. There's a handful of them that include stairs, weird shapes. But there is, if you use rebar or thinking about using rebar, there's been a bunch of updates for 2020 that will benefit you. So this one here is specifically showing the rebar snapping when we're talking about different cover and preserving different dimensions when we're modifying things. Now, moving on to mechanical side of things, the Revit extension for fabrication exports has been updated. So this allows you to reuse different formats, and you can set up your data exports and essentially work with that in more of a CSV format. So that way we can actually work with spreadsheets to support that procurement. And they've also updated the way that changes occur. So that way I can enhance the ductwork. I can allow different selections and services to be changed, but you can still maintain the same shape. So it's not going to have to redo everything. So the workflows have just been streamlined. Now, Format 2020, in all honesty, it's really technically version 17, but Format Pro is one of the things that actually comes with the AEC collection. And this has had a handful of updates this year as well. So I just wanted to make sure I paid a quick minute or two to it to go over that. So some of the things that you have now are custom Java plugins. And similar to SketchUp, which a lot of people tend to migrate from, you can create your own plugins for yourself as well. There's different geometry enhancements, visualizations, some customization tools and filtering. And also it's been added to the health dashboard. So if something's not working or having trouble connecting, you can check on the health dashboard and confirm that everything is up, or maybe there actually is an issue. Now, a couple other things that have been added here, and similar to some of the other tools, these additions are actually coming from the ideas page or the feedback portal for Autodesk. So in this case, they're bringing back the ability to look at the different weather stations and the wind roses. You have the ability to convert to and from a mesh with no data loss. So if I'm trying to streamline things or smooth objects or look at how different ways things can be worked with, I can go do that. I also have the ability to work with just the lines on an element without grabbing the entirety of that object. Yep. There's actually a new plugin manager. I mentioned that before. And Dynamo is now a part of Format. So similar to Civil 3D, similar to some of the other tools, Dynamo is becoming a much bigger part of the different workflows. And the visual scripting will just streamline and make things easier for you to work with. And one of the other things that people have been asking for is the ability to manipulate materials on an individual basis. So if you're placing material across multiple objects and I wanted to modify how it looks on one side of it, for example, I don't have to create a brand new material, which was the workaround in the past. Now I can just right-click on it and say I'd like to adjust that placement. So again, there's been a bunch of Format updates. The current version is actually 17.3. So we have a handful of updates that have happened, including the support for 2019 SketchUp files and some new autosave features. Oh, and also in previous years' versions, you would be saving to the cloud for A360 Drive. Format now actually connects to BIM 360 Document Management. That is a separate subscription, but it can actually save your models there for viewing and for markups and for issues. And you can also save to other cloud services if you'd like. Another one here is Advanced Steel 2020. Now, similar to AutoCAD and Civil 3D, they've updated things to have more of a consistent look and feel. So the dialog windows are that dark blue. The also supports high resolution monitors for 4K. And when you are doing that, the icons will actually scale correctly. Now, a bunch of the workflows in here. There's new options from the contextual menus. You can actually work with different components. Some, again, similar to what we saw inside of Revit, that ability to propagate the connections, same idea. So I can actually put it in one location and say, I want to propagate this throughout. And again, another tool now that actually has the ability to connect directly to Dynamo for streamlining processes and helping with workflows. From the annotation and documentation side of things, we now have the ability to do automatic label placement. There's tools specifically to help align our labels. And when it comes to cut symbols, we have the ability to define standard locations, standard layouts, and we can put default layouts based on the kind of section or property we're looking at. Do we want it to always go up? Do we want it to go down? Do we want it to go to the right? So these are different things that I can modify. So essentially I can align those cut symbols. And if I do have to put in manual locations or manual overrides, those actually are retained when I do an update for my drawings. Now, a lot of things. We're focusing on performance and we're focusing on interoperability. So Advanced Steel, the new extension, actually does have more interoperability with Revit 2020. There's a mapping system, so I can create rule-based connections between the two. And if I have beam shortenings inside of Revit, there's an option for me to ignore those. So maybe I'm doing it in Revit just for graphics or for documentation. This can ignore that so I can make sure that the fabrication have the correct LOD. And just be aware, you do have to install the extension as a separate plugin. And last but not least, we have Navisworks 2020. One of the major updates this time around is more of a visual update. So this allows me to actually highlight where my sections are being cut through the model. So this makes it a lot easier to understand if something is being sliced through or if that's just being drawn where it is. And I have the ability to control this. I can turn it on or off. I can also modify the outline color to make sure that it does read against my design or against the other geometry in the file. So if I have a lot of, say, structure and it's all red, this allows me to change it to a different color so I can really read and get an understanding of what's going on. Another thing they've done is they've added multi-threading for my clash detection. So in this case, similar to what we saw with some of the updates for Revit, it's not doing one thing and then the next and then the next. It's able to do multiple things at the same time. So if you have a multi-core processor, you could cut this down by, 2/3, depending on how fast your computer is. So hopefully this will make life a lot easier for those large projects where we're doing coordination meetings. And then other updates we actually have an updated IFC file reader. So this is using the same code for Revit to handle IFCs. So in terms of hierarchy, data enhancements, it'll be more consistent that way. There's also a new, it's still technically in beta, but it's a DGN file reader. So adding more property and iModel abilities into Navisworks if you're working with MicroStation DGN files. And in addition to those, there's also some improvements to how the faceting factor works for imports, and also for the Revit rebar improvements. There's been changes in Navisworks to take advantage of that and make sure everything still views accordingly. So those are the major updates to the components inside the AEC collection. Again, I didn't touch on everything, otherwise I'd be here for more than a couple hours. Are there any questions on anything? And while people type in the questions, I'm just going to hop down here and let you know about some of the upcoming webinars we have. So in July, we actually have a handful. So on July 16th, I'll be doing a webinar on the BIM 360 Build Cost Management Service. So the cost management is the most recent service that has been added to BIM 360. Its focus is on handling of change orders and the project budget. We have another session on the 23rd focusing on using Bluebeam. And then we have the full What's New in Revit 2020 occurring on July 30th. And that'll be done with Greg Delisio. Okay, so just looking through the questions here. All right, one question is where can you go to find all of the updates? All of the updates really depend on which program you look at. Some of them, like Navisworks, the help folder or the help website don't cover all of them. So you kind of have to just go through the program or look at some of the blog posts from the Navisworks team. Much of the other services, the Format blog, that covers a lot of the updates, which is important because it's a web-based service. So that one updates more often. Then you have the 3D Max. They actually have a bunch of videos and the what's new inside of their help. The other thing you can also do is give Microdesk a call or an email. We'll be glad to set up a specific webinar for your needs and go over how the new tools can help with your workflow, or actually do what's new training depending on how far you're upgrading from. So we have some clients that upgrade from, say, 2017 to 2020, and that's a pretty big jump. So in those cases, maybe you want to have an hour training or a half day or whatever's required. Question is Revit 2020 backwards compatible? No, Revit is still not backwards compatible. You can always open forward, but you cannot save backwards. And there have been another one. There are a few updates to how Revit can work with BIM 360. I just didn't touch on those for time, and not a lot of people are using the non-work shared cloud service, but there is actually the ability to save your Revit model if it's not work shared to BIM 360 or to the cloud without the BIM 360 design subscription. So kind of like how you have the AutoCAD web. Alrighty, any other questions? Okay, if there are any questions from anybody, if there's something you wanted to ask but you didn't have a chance to, always feel free to reach out. So you have our number here, the email for team@microdesk.com. You can also reach us out on social media, on the Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And we have our own channel on YouTube. This presentation will end up on YouTube probably within the week. So if you wanted to review it or have somebody else take a look at it, feel free to share it. And if there's anything else coming up, let me know. I'll be glad to help out. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time. I really appreciate it, and have a great rest of the day.